When I was 21, for my 21st birthday, someone gave me a silver hip flask engraved with my name. And that's a backhanded gift, isn't it? It's like saying, "Happy birthday, you look like someone who needs to drink alone in a public toilet." Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country.
Whispers, a song untold, soft as silk.
Over the course of my alcoholism, I had several experiences with hallucinations and delusions and psychosis and paranoia while I was withdrawing from alcohol. In fact, the name of this channel, Bat Country, comes from one of the most vivid hallucinations that I had in an experience with alcoholic hallucinosis, where I hallucinated bats in my room. But I saw a lot of weird things. I saw grotesque lizard-like animals and demonic characters around my bed and in my room. Dead, decaying women, shadowy characters, the Hat Man. And I saw weird, violent sexual imagery. I saw deformed and badly injured faces. So a cheery start to this video. But these hallucinations have fascinated me ever since I had them. And other people's experiences with them also fascinate me. I will always make time to listen to somebody's alcoholic hallucinosis or delirium tremens experience. In fact, I seek them out. I like to listen to other people's experiences and find similarities in what we saw. And those of us who have had them, who've been through those experiences, we often feel like you can't possibly understand what they're like unless you've experienced them yourself. Trying to explain an episode of alcoholic hallucinosis to someone who hasn't experienced it, it's a very alien feeling, because they're not like anything else. They're not like drug trips, not really. And they're utterly terrifying. That's the hardest thing to try to explain to somebody, is just how beyond fearful, beyond terror they are. They're profoundly terrifying, and the trauma that they leave you with lasts for a long time after the delusions and the hallucinations have faded away. So I spend a lot of time listening to and reading information about other people's experiences. I find them absolutely compelling. I find mine so confusing that I am compelled to try to understand them. Now, while some people turn to the big book for their sobriety information, or some people turn to the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, whatever it is, I find myself increasingly turning to PubMed, dense medical papers and scientific journals for information about alcohol and its effects. I find myself reading quite a lot of very arcane medical literature. And all of those things are equal. Like the medical literature and the big book and the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, all of these things are equal. It's just that I find some of them are more equal than others. So one of my viewers, one of you fine people, emailed me a medical paper called Acute Alcoholic Hallucinosis, a Review. That's the title. I'll put the link to this paper in the description should you want to take a look at it yourself, so you can go and check all the sources that it's pulling from if you want. It's a review of all recent medical literature that in one way or another deals with alcoholic hallucinosis. And I found a really unusual bit of information buried deep in that paper about what the real biochemical processes are that actually cause the hallucinations in alcohol withdrawal. It kind of lit a fire in me, and it gave me the confidence that I needed to talk about something that I've been resisting talking about ever since I started this channel. I resisted talking about it because I suspect it's going to alienate quite a significant portion of my audience. That's not intentional. I'm not deliberately trying to isolate people. But when I talk about this stuff and the things that I saw in alcoholic hallucinosis and delirium tremens, I tend to get a lot of comments from people trying to convince me that the hallucinations I had are spiritual in nature, or supernatural, or they're demonic visitations, or they're astral projections, or they're glimpses into other dimensions, or visions of another plane of reality, that kind of thing. I get a lot of that when I talk about my hallucinations. But the truth of that has always been that I don't feel like that. I don't agree that they're in any way supernatural. I never had the sense that I was peering behind the veil of reality or anything like that. That's never how it felt. It always felt to me like what I was seeing were manifestations of electrochemical processes in my brain. And now I think, thanks to this paper that I'm going to talk about in some detail today, I think I've found the evidence I need to kind of back that up, or at least to explain it. So this is, of course, all very subjective. I am talking about personal experience here. And I'm in no way intending to demean or diminish the experiences or the interpretations of other people who have gone through this and come to different conclusions. This is just my own interpretation, and all interpretations are equal. It's just that I feel like some interpretations are more equal than others. But if it does turn out, in the off chance that it is also interesting to you, please do like and subscribe and comment with your own experience and your own interpretation. But hang in there. As much as I think this is likely to be a boring video, which I may not ever publish, we are going to get to the interesting bit pretty soon, pretty quickly. So the hallucinations that we experience in alcohol withdrawal are so uniquely vivid, so uniquely terrifying, that afterwards a lot of us who talk to each other about them say things like, "I cannot believe that my mind was capable of coming up with that." I've said it myself. In a previous video, an old one about delirium tremens, I talked about how I hallucinated an hours-long musical about my own private anxiety about my fertility. It had identifiable characters, and the characters had arcs. There was character development. They all had their own little narratives. And everything that was spoken in this hallucination rhymed perfectly, like Shakespearean quality. And I remember another hallucination in which I was traveling at close to the speed of light, across the earth and then off into distant alien cities and that kind of thing. And my mind was generating the visuals in real time, like giving me what I felt was like a realistic depiction of traveling at relativistic speeds. And I knew that I was hallucinating when that was happening, and I just kind of let it happen. I just kind of studied it in awe at my own capacity for creativity, the sheer processing power of my brain that I had no idea it was capable of. I had no idea, and I had no idea also that I was capable of generating such gory and sexually violent images too. And I worried about what that said about my psyche for a long time. I worried about, like, where was it all coming from? How was my brain generating these images and these noises and so convincing dialogue happening around me and being able to construct music out of nothing? Like, was I being plugged into some subspace network, or was this stuff being transmitted into my brain? Was I astrally projecting? Was my soul somewhere out there in the cosmos while my body lay withdrawing from alcohol in bed? Were these past lives that I was conjuring up or recalling? And I privately wrestled with these questions for a long time. But none of the answers that I arrived at, like astral projection or past lives or demonic visitation, none of these felt right. None of these answers were satisfying. But this paper does provide an answer which I do find satisfying. So I'm going to read you a little bit of dense medical language from this paper, but then I'm going to break it down to translate it as best as I can. So just indulge me for a second while we go back to the paper. Okay, this is the relevant bit. Published studies have suggested several neurobiological mechanisms that may account for the occurrence of hallucinations in patients with alcohol dependence. They include dysfunction of the dopaminergic system, dysfunction of the serotonergic system, decrease in the concentration of inhibitory neurotransmitter amino acids, and increase in concentration of excitatory glutamine asparagine neurotransmitter amino acids, changes in beta-carboline activity rates, and possible damages of auditory and sensory conducting pathways. Just pausing there for a moment. There's something in there that I'd never heard of before. I knew all about the glutamate and GABA and, neurotransmitters and amino acids and all of that stuff. I'd never heard of beta-carboline activity rates. That got my attention. And I wonder if there are some of you who are watching this who do know what that is and are already jumping ahead. So then the paper goes through all of those things I just mentioned one by one, all of the mesolimbic pathways and cerebrospinal fluid and decreased glutamate and blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to skip over that and return to what it says about beta-carboline activity. This is what the paper mentions about that particular chemical compound. Since plant extracts containing beta-carboline can cause hallucinations, the increased plasma levels of beta-carboline detected in patients with acute alcoholic hallucinosis may have potential pathogenetic significance. You can see why that got my attention, right? So let's talk about beta-carbolines for a moment. What are they? Since they're completely new to me, I'd never heard of them before I started reading this paper, there's a chance that they might be new to you too. This explains so much. For me, it answers so many questions that I had about my own experiences with alcohol-induced hallucinations. Beta-carbolines are a group of naturally occurring chemical compounds. They occur in trace amounts in our bodies and in some plants, most notably those used in the production of ayahuasca. What beta-carbolines do is they act on the benzodiazepine receptor sites of your GABA-A receptors, essentially the same function as ayahuasca. They're known as inverse agonists because instead of enhancing your GABA's soothing effects, they block it. And that just pushes your brain into overdrive. And it's weird that I'd never heard of this, considering how much reading I do about this. It is unusual that I'd never heard about this because it makes perfect sense. This might explain why. During alcohol withdrawal, when GABA is already low, higher levels of beta-carbolines can kind of supercharge the chaos, can kind of invoke the hallucinations. And the study that I've just been reading from, all of the patients in them had elevated beta-carboline levels in patients experiencing acute alcohol hallucinosis. And that suggests pretty unequivocally to me that these compounds are creating the hallucinations themselves. And it's not me spinning off the top of my head here. This isn't tinfoil hat time. A lot of the researchers of that paper and others that they're quoting draw parallels between this effect of the beta-carbolines inducing hallucinations during alcohol withdrawal with the effects of the hallucinogenic plants like those used in shamanic rituals. That's why these hallucinations feel supernatural. Because during withdrawal, your brain is dosing itself with its own brand of hallucinogen. We're not puncturing through to other planes of reality or being visited by demons. As weird as these hallucinations are to experience, they are all explainable and they are comprehensible. The mechanics of them are comprehensible. But I feel like that's not enough, because if you're of the sort who believes that a shaman really truly is transcending their physical body when they're ingesting hallucinogens, like they're really truly communing with ancestors or animal spirits and that kind of thing, then nothing changes for you. This information doesn't challenge that belief. It's just those are not my beliefs. I don't believe that shamans are communing with spirits and that kind of thing. My beliefs have been all along that this is a process very much bound by chemical properties and physical laws. This is a neurochemical process and not a metaphysical one. For me, it's not a spiritual experience. It's a process of chaotic neuroscience. And that is every bit as beautiful as it being a spiritual experience. However, this explanation does leave questions hanging, doesn't it? If you're coming to this from a religious perspective, and I'm trying to convince you that there is a scientific basis for all of this, for these hallucinatory experiences, you might be right to question me and ask me a very difficult question, which is this. If it's just neurochemical reactions, why do so many people from so many different cultural contexts and from so many different demographics tend to hallucinate the same things? Isn't that indicative of some kind of divine order in the chaos? Doesn't that imply that we are all connected to some kind of shared consciousness? And I like those questions. I'm not afraid of those kind of metaphysical and spiritual questions. And they are good questions. In other words, why do we hear demons talking about us? Why do we all see the Hat Man or the Shadow People or the insects crawling on us or under our skin? Why do so many of us see snakes? Why are our hallucinations characterized by human faces? Why do we all see human faces? If this is not a spiritual experience, why do we see visions of hell? It's like this. We are all born with patterns in our brains. Grammar is a good example. And it's a good way to try to explain this. So we are all born, the vast majority of us are born with the capacity for language already built into our brains. We already have the foundations of language in our brains when we are born. As weird as it sounds, the actual words that we use and that we learn are the least important part of language in a lot of respects. They're certainly the last part of the process. The actual words that most of us consider to be language, they're the very last thing to happen in the process of language acquisition. And a lot of people tend to think that we just learn, we're born and then we learn language from other people around us. We acquire it from adults and we learn new words just through growing up and being around other people. But that's not really how it works. It's only a very small part of the story. The words we pick up after we're born simply fill pre-existing slots in a model of human grammar that is already extant in our brain when we are born. We are predisposed to acquire language. The framework is already there. And if you're doubtful, I'll prove it to you with a very simple thought experiment. You've probably heard young children talking, right? Quite often, if you're playing hide and seek with a kid, a young child, they might, after the game, they might say something like, "I hided in the closet." Now, there's no way they picked up the word hided from the adults around them, because we know as adults that that's not correct. No one is saying hided. That child didn't hear that word from us. That child generated it according to a pre-existing model of grammar in their brain. They took hide and made it past tense incorrectly. It's called a virtuous error in child language acquisition. And it's perfect evidence that the grammar is in our brain already. Point is, we already have these kinds of templates hardwired into our brains when we are born. We use them for all sorts of things, and our brain uses them for pattern recognition and also pattern prediction as well. And it can go wrong when sensory input is missing or distorted. In states like alcohol withdrawal, where visual input and brain chemistry are both kind of chaotic, both scrambled, the brain can start defaulting to primitive and emotionally charged imagery. It starts relying more on ancient instincts that are kind of coded into the more primordial parts of our brain. Insects, for example. These trigger deep evolutionary fears, but perhaps because insects are associated with disease or danger or even death. So when your nervous system is highly alert, when it's anxious, as it is during withdrawal, your brain kind of summons these as like warning hallucinations. I saw lizards and snakes, lots of snakes, and we all have instinctive alarm systems built into our most ancient brain systems to notify us that these creatures that look like this shape, are venomous. Stay away from them. Be fearful of them. And it's no surprise that in states of fear, like in alcoholic hallucinosis, we see the things that we are fundamentally afraid of, the things that we are evolutionarily afraid of. And I imagine, like, if a horse had alcoholic hallucinosis, it also would hallucinate snakes or something similar, insects, that kind of thing. Does that imply a demonic visitation? Has a demon visited that horse? I doubt it, because Judeo-Christianity doesn't endow horses with a soul, and therefore it's unlikely it's going to get visited by a demon. Shadow figures too, the Hat Man. I saw female figures that fit this bill too. They're classic examples of pareidolia. Pareidolia is seeing shapes or faces in the dark or on the fringes on your peripheral vision. And that is also a side effect of this kind of ancient part of our brain and our pattern recognition systems. We're programmed, for lack of a better word, to spot human shapes, and particularly faces. You can always spot the silhouette of a person. That's why, if you're a sniper, your ambition is to break up this shape here, from your head to your shoulders, because it's automatically identifiable. It's a bit like autofocus on a camera. You automatically recognize that shape, and that kind of silhouette. And faces, the same. We spot faces everywhere we go. There's a famous face, the face of Mars, right? Which is just a rock formation, but we're programmed to see it as a face. When your visual system is misfiring and your fear circuitry is activated, your brain can project vague, human-like forms into the shadows. The Hat Man in particular is common in sleep paralysis and in all sorts of psychosis and in alcohol withdrawal. He's often interpreted as a menacing observer, which fits the intense paranoia that you're also feeling. When we are fearful, these pattern recognition systems, they're cranked way up because you're already anxious. They're designed to help us spot threats. And in that state of anxiety, we feel threatened. So it's only natural we would then, in hallucinosis, see those threats. And that's why people from totally different cultures, of completely different demographics, and on completely different chemicals and drugs, also see similar things across the hallucinations. And mental illness too. That's quite often people with manic depression or schizophrenia will also see spiders crawling under their skin, or a looming figure in a dark coat standing in the doorway. These are not religious visualizations. These are pre-programmed. There is already a framework. These already exist within us. They're not projected into our heads from external sources. In fact, they are projections from deep within us. We're projecting outwards rather than having those projected in. Those terrifying figures, they're inside us all along, and they're always there. And I might risk further alienating a very loyal and part of my audience by going even further and saying that I would venture that the images of hell that we see are also not taken from religion. They're not religious visualizations. I think that religious visualizations are based on those neurological templates that are innate within us. We created visions of hell. Oh man, this was a weird video even by my standards. Look, if you've made it this far into a video this dense and weird, then surely you should subscribe, right? I would really, really appreciate it. Otherwise, why? Why did you watch this much? We'll go back to normal programming around next week when I finally get my tooth fixed permanently and I can stop feeling so self-conscious about being on camera, which is why I've been off, at least partially, for so long. But until then, thank you so much for watching this strange video. And as always, good luck out there.